For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lotus Thomas, and I'm the program director for Coho US. And most of you probably know already about Coho US, but for anyone new, we are a national nonprofit seeking to advance co-housing and shift the culture toward a new American dream where every home is surrounded by caring, collaborative neighbors who use less of the Earth's resources while living an abundant life. So if you're excited about that, maybe make a little comment in the chat window, what inspires you about that mission? And I'm guessing a lot of you are all sharing that mission in some way. And we're really excited to be working together with Eric Bonnet and Mathilde Berth from Studio Cohab for this upcoming 6-week training launching your community. And today is an hour-long intro with them. I'm just going to start by introducing them. Mathilde is an architectural designer and co-founder of Studio Cohab. She moved to the US from France to focus her career on co-housing and worked with McCammett and Durrett Architects. And she's also helped develop Habitat and Partage, I think is how you say it, maybe Partage, a cooperative that aims to facilitate the emergence of co-housing projects in France. And between France and the US, she has visited and contributed to many communities, exploring the relationship between design and social structure of communities. And she's also received her Living Future accreditation, which strengthens her commitment to bring people together to build a more socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative future. So very aligned with our mission as well. And then Eric Bonnet is a registered architect with deep expertise in sustainability and participatory design. His experience includes facilitating integrated design of groundbreaking LEED and net zero carbon projects while at Rocky Mountain Institute. And his work focuses on integrating the economic, environmental, and social components of sustainability with a focus on equity and empowerment. Eric taught sustainability from an interdisciplinary perspective at Montana State University and has published research on cost optimization of energy efficiency. He's worked to design and also found co-housing communities across the US. And Eric is passionate about collaborating with co-housing communities and helping you turn those aspirations into reality. I'll pass it over to you both.
Thanks, Lotus.
Yeah, thank you, Lotus, for this really nice introduction. So let's dive in a little bit. So yeah, like as Lotus said, we both with Studio Cohab, it's a firm that is an architecture firm, and we focus on innovative and sustainable design, such as co-housing, but not only. I'm calling from Louisville or Louisville, Kentucky right now, and that's where my office is. Eric's office is in Bozeman in Montana. And between the two of us, we work kind of around the US, all around the US, and a little bit around the world too, a little bit. But yeah, our most famous current project is Bozeman Co-housing, which is, as we know of, the first net zero energy co-housing project in the US. So we're really excited about that. It's under construction right now. You can see some of those pictures. The two on the right, the two renderings, because it's under construction, so we don't yet have it, like perfectly done. But the construction photo is that too. And yeah, between the two of us, we've worked on dozens of other co-housing projects, including Kimper Village. That's the picture of the site workshop you can see here. Fair Oaks co-housing, Shepherd's Village co-housing, and many more. We also co-housing advocate, and so that's why we do this presentation. We do many presentations with the Co-Housing Institute, with the Co-Housing Association, and the FIC, Foundation for Intentional Communities. And so this course that we'll be talking about today and introducing a little bit is something that we've done a little bit, or like not a little bit, but something really similar that we've done in person at the conference. We've done also this course with the Foundation for Intentional Communities. So we really try to, use our resources to spread the word about co-housing, because we really believe that this is a great way to live, and this is great communities, and we'd love to see more being born. And so that's why we're all here today. And yeah, actually, the thing I wanted to say about those courses too is that we're actually working right now currently working with 2 groups that were formed during those classes that we gave previously. So we like to think that it can be a really efficient way to get started for groups. So yeah.
Awesome. And we'll talk in just a second more about kind of what we're doing today and the class in general. But before we start, we also like to take the practice of acknowledging the land and labor that have contributed to the movement. We'll be talking about co-housing. Hopefully that's obvious at this point today, which is a movement that develops housing and in an attempt to be, nurturing of the land and, the kind of greater social environment and of the people living there and, us as a society. That also is a paradox when we're talking about developing and owning property, which we know we're occupying land that was taken from Native nations. This acknowledgement is a kind of ongoing conversation in the movement and in communities. For instance, the Bozeman co-housing community, which Mathilde just talked about, and also I'm a member of, our land acknowledgement recognizes that, where I am calling in from is the ancestral lands of the Crow, Cheyenne, Salish, and Kootenai people. And so if you're unaware of the native land where you're calling from, there's a great website, which we're also kind of like posting, on the slide, a map. And I think that's kind of important to know. And acknowledging being the first step, right? And so, yeah. You've already introduced ourselves, so I think we kind of introduced where we're coming from and ourselves. So I think at this point, we'll pass back to Mathilde and we'll kind of jump into where we're going from here.
Thanks. So yeah, I guess Lotus already asked you all to introduce kind of like your name, your location, and your interest in co-housing. We'll talk some more. We'll have also like plenty of time for questions at the end. So kind of what we wanted to do today is talk a little bit about the defining aspects of co-housing. And because we only have 1 hour, we won't be able to go in depth about that, but it's just giving you a little snippet of what the course will be about. And during the course, we'll be able to go in way greater details about what is co-housing and also especially like how to start your own community and tools and so on. And so, so the defining aspects, we'll be talking about the social aspect, the physical aspect, and the organizational aspect. And then we'll have some time to have an overview about the different chapters of the class that we're proposing and time for Q&A.
Great. I'd imagine many of you have probably heard of co-housing before. I know many of you live in co-housing, or some of you live in co-housing as well already, or in forming groups. And I think this is helpful, to kind of this is kind of how we think about co-housing, and I guess kind of a jumping off point for the course that we'll be doing. So, I think for most people, the social aspect, I mean, that's kind of the core of what we're doing here in co-housing, right? It's like, I think at least, maybe if it's environmentally, you can kind of only go so far by yourself and cutting your footprint. And at some point you need to start working with neighbors to kind of go further than that. Or maybe, kind of feeling like you have a sense of isolation or kind of crave, richer, tighter bonds with people that you live around. Those are kind of examples of different reasons that people may want to move into co-housing. For me, I learned about it in college about 20 years ago, and always had the goal of moving in by the time I had a young child. And my son will move in around his 3rd birthday. So that was kind of my original motivation. So can you go into the next slide? I think like one kind of defining piece of the kind of social aspect of co-housing is spontaneous interactions. I think, especially a lot of people outside of the co-housing movement, hear co-housing and they think of like maybe people sitting around in a circle and kind of singing Kumbaya. And not that like never happens in co-housing, but I think what really makes co-housing vibrant and work and makes it nourishing is just being able to walk, in the, kind of lower right slide. It's like on your way back from laundry, you just get into a conversation. Or the upper right slide, that's my son I was just talking about, and Katie McCammett, who's a co-housing development consultant, kind of welcoming us into her house, right? And it's like a safe place for Leaf, that's my son, to kind of run around in the kind of co-housing environment, and just kind of have those just like fun, unplanned interactions. The lower or the left side is an example from when Mathilde was at Silver Sage, and kind of after dinner, everyone's like, yeah, let's just kind of go outside, and it's a beautiful night, let's hang out and talk. It wasn't like a planned, like, we must go outside afterwards. Just like the environment just facilitated that kind of casual, unplanned, kind of happy hour after dinner. I think like another piece, which is kind of where I started, is these kind of like strong relationships with your neighbors, right? And that doesn't mean that everyone in your co-housing communities can be a friend or even your best friend, but having it's like most neighbor relationships in kind of suburban neighborhoods might be just kind of like waving out of a car window, right? In co-housing, people strive to like actually know and on some level care about your neighbors, and so in this case, right, this is, I think, Vancouver co-housing, and just a bunch of kids doing a little bike parade. That's but I think another piece that kind of we think is really important to the social kind of definition of co-housing is this balance between community and privacy, right? So most American neighborhoods don't offer a lot in the way of community. They're really focused on privacy. Whereas co-housing strikes to seek a balance, right? So it's not like we're all living in each other's house. This is an example from a project in France, and that it's like co-housing partly is defined by having your own kitchen, right? And having a complete house where you have access to privacy when you want it, but also you get that access to community when you want it, unlike most other American neighborhoods. So kind of in a nutshell, that's kind of what we think are the kind of key social aspects of co-housing.
Yes, and so then there's the physical aspects that, because social aspects are so important, like usually the physical aspect also like reinforce the social aspect. We like this slide to explain a little bit. I feel like probably the audience here like knows what co-housing is, but sometimes it gets confused between kibbutz and communes and so on, and condominiums. Here, the idea is really everyone has their own private space and have a common space that really, there is this connection between your private and your common space that is really organic and it's kind of spilled out, like your house spills out into the community. And that can take many, many different architectural forms. That's only 9 of them. There are as many forms as there are communities. You saw on the previous slides too, like some like really modern architecture, some more traditional. That really depends on the group. But they all have in common that they really try to reinforce having a design that facilitates community and privacy and, having that social success. And so, for example, on this slide, by having your houses clustered and really close to one another, you have a really intense social life on the front yard, and your backyard gets plenty of privacy. And there's another component to it, is extensive common spaces, common facilities. And so those common facilities allow people to have smaller houses because you don't need as much, because so much of your needs are already taken care of in the common house. So really common, almost staple of co-housing is the common dinners. Having a common dining room in your common house really facilitates life and makes just like preparing food for your family or for yourself easier and taking turns and so on. And so it really facilitates daily life, and that's kind of the goal of cooking for one another as much as enhancing the social aspect of the community. Another really common one is having a workshop, for example, and that's really typical of this idea of, well, maybe if you have 30 units in your community, you don't need 30 table saws, and maybe 1 or 2 is plenty for the whole community, and that way not only you save space and you save resources, but you also are enabling to get skills from your neighbors and get to know how to use. I have no idea how to use a table saw, and I would love to learn from a neighbor. And so, this is really like common, like daily interactions that can be planned or not, and learning from one another and getting resources from one another. Another common one can be also the guest room. Same idea, not everyone needs to have a guest room in their own house. If you have 2 or 3, even maybe just 1, depending on the size of your co-housing community, but if you have some guest rooms in your common house, then you can take turns hosting guests in the common house and don't have to have this extra space and extra impact on the environment. And so, having the common facilities, having also what is really important in co-housing design is having a pedestrian environment and a car-free environment. And so, this is the Nevada City co-housing site plan. And as you can see on the north part, they clustered all of the parking and garages by the street. And so you arrive, you park, and then you leave your car, walk by the common house to go to your house. And that's really by having this ritual of passing by the common house that you get to see the daily interactions that happen and have the spontaneity that is really looked for. And by clustering your houses, you're able to preserve more open space and more green space. And so, it's a super important aspect of co-housing, because then it allows things like that. Like in this same co-housing project in Nevada City, because the car is left outside of the community, then the community can really happen inside. And, you wouldn't be having a picnic on asphalt, but you can totally have picnic. And they're actually having a picnic on the fire lane right now, because it was designed by people that know how to design co-housing. And so they were able to kind of still make it really safe. A fire truck is still able to, arrive to a house, but also make sure that the environment is designed for humans and not for cars.
Awesome. And so the kind of third little kind of like sample, I guess, of things we think about co-housing and high level, right? That'll kind of get woven into the course, the 6-week course, is the organizational aspects, right? So it's like, how does co-housing work, right? So it's kind of talked about the physical and social pieces to it, but it's like, how do groups typically, organize themselves? And so this is, I think we showed the slide before. I mentioned it's from the Quimper Village kind of site plan. And if you go on Google Earth right now and look at that community, it looks pretty darn similar to this organization of blocks that was created through a participatory process with the future residents. So these are, kind of future residents. In this case, they're kind of picking which they think would be their favorite house based on this this site plan. And this kind of is like one of the last pieces of the site workshop, kind of making sure that everyone doesn't want to live in the same one. That would be the sign of a bad site plan, right? And you can see they're kind of spread around, which means that they I think did come up with a really great way to lay out their community in this case. And I think that's part of the participatory process is that it's, I think, really effective. So it's a better site plan than just a kind of group of architects could have come up with on their own. It also provides a lot of ownership for the community having participated in creating it, as well as being fun. And I think equally important, it's like the process of going through that decision-making process helps strengthen the community kind of organizationally as well as socially. So those are a number of reasons why participatory process is a kind of common theme across co-housing development. The next kind of piece is resident management. And with this, there are other types of communities that are maybe like managed and developed by a for-profit company or something like that. Whereas co-housing, one of the kind of fundamental ideas is empowering the people that are going to and do live in the community to make decisions for themselves. That doesn't mean that every like leaf is picked up by residents. In some communities it is that way. Some communities choose to hire out certain jobs, but those decisions reside with the residents, not some kind of king or or LLC or corporation that's making decisions for people basically. And I think again, right, it's like done right rather than just this being work. That's what's shown here. This is another French co-housing project. This is what they call a work party, right? So it's like not just about wheeling wheelbarrows of mulch around. It's about hanging out with your neighbors, building those social bonds, having a good time. And that's kind of what it's all about. Again, in co-housing, back to the social piece. The third thing kind of we're going to mention about organization. So there's different if it's like people call consensus, or this is from Sociocracy for All, sociocracy. They're kind of different flavors of a non-hierarchical decision-making processes that different communities use. But fundamentally, that's the big piece. They're non-hierarchical. They provide the members of the community input on decisions, and typically some level of kind of like veto power, especially during the design side, when residents are often contributing significant amounts of their own money to this kind of future house that will happen. But to do that, you also kind of need to know something about that house, and just a lot of things that, the very beginning, like, that last slide with the wooden blocks, like that's all that those residents knew, is that those were houses, they didn't know what size, what stove they would have, or, anything like that. So, having kind of control, some level of appropriate control over those decisions that were made kind of enables folks to contribute the money that's required to make the process run, because that like nothing terrible is going to happen because you could stop it, right? So that's the kind of like, if stopping terrible decisions, but generally the process is focused on like, okay, what does everyone need? Let's try and understand everyone's concerns and then build towards a decision that meets everyone's needs as best as possible. So that's kind of non-hierarchical decision making in a nutshell. And the last piece that kind of like defines co-housing is that people have separate income sources. So, Mathilde showed a slide of, kind of like co-working or co-living or communes or other, kind of terms that like kind of fly around the kind of intentional community, or maybe kind of people confused with co-housing. So, like a convent, for instance, or a kibbutz, or a mini communes, like people would share income, like they would maybe like work together on a farm and it was their business. So in co-housing, that's not the case. Like people have their own jobs. This is an example of co-housing in Seattle. And so, this particular project has an architecture firm on the ground floor, Schemata. That's their project, but it's not like everybody in the co-housing works at Schemata. Grace Kim does, but not the other people, right? It just happens that the way that this site worked out, where they wanted to build the co-housing, it made sense to have some commercial property as part of it. And that happens from time to time with co-housing, but typically not. And even if there is commercial property, that's not like the point of the community, right? The point is the kind of social interaction of the neighbors. So that's kind of what we mean by separate income sources. One other, kind of note, we get into this in a lot more detail in the class, kind of like how the money works and how different, organizational structures, but the kind of like top line, most groups form as an LLC during the development phase, and then that becomes a homeowners association in the living phase. Some states in the country support co-ops, and so there are certain places in the country where that's a little bit more common, but that kind of LLC to HOA is the typical thing. But those are just kind of like loose legal frameworks, and there are some attorneys in the country, for instance, who are like really good at crafting those so that they're meeting the kind of co-housing goals, right? So like a co-housing HOA is very different from your average American HOA, right? Like one example being that typically every member is on the board, right? Because of this idea of non-hierarchical decision making, which is one example of a difference between virtually every other HOA in the country. So so that's kind of like organizational aspects of co-housing. in a nutshell.
Yeah, and so those three aspects of physical, organization, and social need to really help each other out and support each other out. And so, for example, like that's a slide from another co-housing community that unfortunately is struggling with the social aspect of their community and have really little use of the common house. But also, like, that's the first thing I saw when I started to visit their community is those mailboxes that you don't even have to leave your car to pick up your mail. And so these kind of things, like when you pick up your mail through your car, you won't be meeting your neighbor the same way that here, like this is a lot more typical in co-housing where your mailbox is in the common house. And so you pick up your mail on the way from your car to your house by the common house. And that's where you can have cubicles and you can have a board with all of the things that are happening and all of the events and maybe some free stuff and some lost and found and all of those excuses, because it's really about that. I feel like a lot of people want to run into each other and want to have, and also if you don't, it's fine. But when you do want to like have this casual interaction with your neighbor, it really helps to have that excuse of, oh, I'm checking out the free stuff, I'm checking out the events. And so creating those spaces where those casual interactions can happen, really, like the physical, again, like needs to be helped by the organization and the social aspects of your community. That's another example of Eastern Village was a co-housing community that was actually featured in the New York Times. And the author talked about the fact that the stove that you can see on these slides was imposed by the fire department, and they just didn't have, enough power or will, or I don't know what happened, but like they just like let it slide. And that's actually design moves that are super important to like really try to fight for having a stove that will fit your community and will be easy to use and will be, like having the design of your common house and of your common kitchen that is really facilitating cooking for one another. And so, this community ends up having potluck every now and then, which is great socially. You still get to hang out with each other, and it's, it still serves the social purpose. But what we talked earlier about of kind of facilitating daily life and making it easier to not have to cook for yourself and for everybody every time, well, that doesn't really, like happen with potlucks. You still have to cook the same amount of food. It's just that you bring it to the common house. And so when you have a kitchen that is really designed by people that have, cooked many common dinners before and know how to organize it. So like you can see here, like the open shelves really make it easy to spot anything that's happening. And so you can really, you don't need to know perfectly the kitchen. You can be a first comer and still be able to cook for, all of your neighbors that will be showing up to dinner that night. And the flow is, and it also like doesn't feel industrial, which I feel like it's often a pitfall for some of the common kitchens. And so that really, again, like the organization, the social and the physical have to help each other out. And I think that's all I had to say about this one.
Cool.
Yeah.
So so that kind of concludes our little kind of mini presentation on what we think about co-housing in kind of 20 slides or less. And we just thought that rather than just like sitting for an hour and telling you here's what the class is gonna be on, here's the syllabus, right? It's like you'll get a better sense about what it's about, hearing kind of what we think, talking about some of these topics. I recognize for folks who have started a group, probably a lot of those ideas you're familiar with, but you kind of get to see a little bit about how we think about them and what we think is most important, right? But we do definitely also want to go through the syllabus. So basically this class is, as Mathilde said, there's been some people who've taken it in the class, which in the past, who are now, working to create their dream co-housing community. And, it's definitely, I would say, impossible in, whatever it is, 12 hours to tell you everything you'll ever gonna need to know about co-housing, right? Like, that's not the goal. But what we're trying to do is give you enough information that you can kind of hit the ground running and kind of like know what you know what you don't know, and kind of like, so you don't have these like unknown unknowns that might bite you in the butt later. And so that you have, kind of like vision and direction in terms of, I think a lot of groups come to us and are like, hey, like, what should I do first? Like, what do we need to be focused on, right? And so that's really what this course is structured to do. So anyway, here are kind of like the different sessions we'll be going on over. So the first section is kind of like a brief, I guess more in depth than this, but like a shorter session, just an hour instead of 2 hours, where we're going to go over the course learning goals, kind of like, what do you want? What are we planning on? Making sure that we're kind of aligning the course around what you're looking for, and that you're kind of like oriented to the topic and the structure and all that stuff. Make sure that we're all firing on all cylinders. So that's kind of class number one. Then we have 4 2-hour sessions, which are kind of broken into the major kind of like content pieces. The first one is about, kind of like, what is co-housing really? Some similar thoughts to what we just talked about, but especially this, we kind of like really graze the surface today of this idea of like patterns and practices. So like, what is it about, that makes successful communities successful? Because there are a lot of co-housing communities in the United States, and there's a big variety in terms of success. And even, like, how do you personally define success? How do we define success? May vary as well too, right? But so those are kind of like, that's kind of what we'll get into in that class. And each of these classes also have kind of independent work that you are invited to do between the classes. It's not required, but I know, for instance, like I noticed several folks from the Cheney group here. So, say if you are in a group and taking this together, we really encourage folks to get to. I think there's also, wasn't it the like Lotus House as well too? Several folks in that, right? So get together with other people in your community to do that work, because you'll just get like more out of it and help drive your community forward more that way. If you're on your own, it's fine and great as well too to do it. Do that work on your own. Or if you're too busy, that's fine. You can tuck it away on your hard drive and do it later if you don't have time. Not required, but encouraged. So, okay, class number 3. So this is the kind of design matters. This really focuses on the kind of like physical aspects. Matilda talked about that a bit, but I think the thing that is really unique to co-housing, and definitely like why I love it as an architect, is this relationship between the physical design and the social design. And I think that is, I think what also groups really get out of working with professionals that have an experience, studying, living, working with co-housing, is understanding those relationships. That example of like the mailbox is like kind of like a small detail, but it turns out that going to get the mail is one of the kind of like biggest drivers of people visiting common houses. And that's what then spins off these, kind of incidental, great, well, now let's go get a beer or go for a movie or whatever. So, yeah, great. So that, and then there's definitely like more maybe like obvious things as well too, with the kind of physical social, like this idea of like a car-free environment, and what are different ways that site plans have been organized to do that and make it also work in a variety of climates and support people with different mobility needs, for instance, while still kind of providing a really safe and human focused space between the buildings. So that's kind of design. Class 3, the next class, class 4, is kind of, like it says, how to get the group started, find a site, and found the project. So this is a lot of the kind of like nuts and bolts pieces. So, what do you need to look for in a site? Like, what makes a good co-housing site, or, one that's not going to work out super well? Like what, this is kind of like a lot of these questions we get from folks who are starting groups, like, like, what do I need to do? Should we be, like, how many people do we need before we can start the design workshops? Or like, do we need to have gotten all of our, kind of vision and decision-making structures done before we look for land, right? Or when do we need to start putting in money and how much, right? So those types of questions are what we get into. We also kind of go through like the kind of development process, the way that like the money kind of flows in and out of a project typically, as well as like, do you need a soils engineer? What is even a soils engineer? The kind of different professional partners that you need or maybe should consider, or maybe don't need, right? Like for a successful co-housing project. So that's kind of what that class is about. Less pretty pictures, but also really important stuff to have a successful project. And then, class 5. So this is group process. So this is, kind of we talked about the organizational stuff, like consensus versus sociocracy. Like, how about like committees and teams, and like, what are the big workflows that need to be done, and what are things that we should do ourselves versus hire out, or you can do either way. So that is kind of that piece. What is the group process? And then the last class is another shorter one that's focused on kind of where do you go from here. Often we have quite a lot of questions that maybe relate to your specific project or something that we talked about but didn't have time to go into more depth. And so just having done this before, it seems like it's really useful to have some time at the end to make sure that what you're hoping to get out of the class, we have to have time to do if we haven't hit that nail straight on the head in a prior class. So that is kind of my description of kind of what this class is about. And I think, do you have any like additions, Mathilde, that you'd like to make on structure content?
Not really. Oops, spoiling it all. No, I think it's the idea with the first and the last class is that we usually like aren't huge classes that would be overwhelming, and it would be like a magistral course where you would have to just sit and listen to us speaking forever. The idea is like to create smaller groups so that we can actually interact with each other and kind of like make like shape it as we go and like with you. And so like those are not this is the curriculum, but there is no like hard lines on what we talk about. And so like the intro class is kind of that too. It's like, okay, like what are the aspects that you're really excited to hear about, and where should we spend more time, where should we spend less time? And so like we're happy to talk about it here too, but it's just like let's have conversations about all of those things. And during the class too, we try to make it as interactive as possible, and so we usually try to have some type of slideshows and so on, but then some type of activities that will go back and forth between the students and us. So
this kind of brings up a question that I heard from somebody about whether or not this was just the foundational level for people who are just getting into co-housing, or if it would also be for folks that are further along in the development process. Can you speak to that a little bit? It sounds like you were saying you could kind of adapt it to where people are, but are there particular phases that you think this would be most beneficial for?
I think the classes like the number 3, 4, and 5 are like pretty like content intensive, and so that's why like the 2 hours too. But like if you are really familiar with co-housing, like maybe the like the second class about like what is co-housing, like you might be familiar with a lot of those things. Usually what we found is that like the development part and the design part and the group processes are usually things that people aren't as familiar with yet. And that, if you haven't started your community already, then it's probably going to be things that you need to know. And so, it's kind of impossible to know exactly like what people know before they tell us what they know. But that's my intuition.
Yeah, and I do feel like with the discussion format, like you said, people get to meet one another, and there's that networking aspect of it. So even if they already know what co-housing is, being able to share from their own personal experiences and kind of build relationship and build rapport seems like that'll be going on in those sessions too.
Totally, which is a great point. Thanks for pointing that out, Lotus, is that, yeah, these aren't like 2-hour lectures.
Yeah.
It's like a combination of us talking and, questions and, breakout groups and exercises and stuff. So we do try to use pedagogy that's not going to put you to sleep after 10 minutes. But yeah, I would also say with like, it's like if you are on your own, haven't found a group, I think this is a great class. If you have a kind of new group, I think this is a great class for you. If you have a group that has land and hasn't started the design process, I think it's a great class for you. If you started the design process, like I guess I would hope that your group has a lot of this information already. So I guess it would be, groups we work with typically will do some type of like kickoff workshop. I know Katie also offers kickoff workshops. So, like if you've been through a workshop like that, then yeah, honestly, I would say that some of this stuff will be repeat. Or like, let's say you're about to move into a finished community. Like if you're just, maybe you came in late to a project and you weren't there for the design process and you just like want to learn more about it, it would be totally cool. You can take the class, but I just don't want people to, I just want to try and be accurate in terms of what we're offering, I guess. So yeah, like especially focused for people who are like founding and getting projects like up and running and getting the momentum moving.
Excellent. There were a couple questions. One was about just co-living co-ops and wanting to distinguish between co-housing and co-ops. And I know Matilda actually has a session from Madison that's part of our virtual conference on the Institute about this very topic, but I'll let you speak to it a little bit more.
Yeah, well, the presentation I had was not necessarily about that, but it's a lot about French co-housing, which does integrate co-ops a lot into the co-housing models. And what was the question exactly?
Yeah, it was about, I don't know what section it was actually, if basically this course would apply to co-living co-ops. So I think the answer is kind of from that slide where you were distinguishing it between communes and condominiums and all of that. So there are co-ops, co-housing communities that are organized like co-ops, which is what Matilda's presentation is about. But living where people are sharing the same kitchen and all of that is not necessarily the focus of this.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it definitely applies to both co-housing and co-ops. Although, we're on the Co-Housing Institute and we're doing a class called like how to create co-housing. So it is definitely applying more to co-housing, but a lot of, I think the design aspect, because like if you were like to share a kitchen and so on, like that would be a little different, but a lot of the organization, a lot of the developing is actually pretty similar. So I think you would still like find a lot of information that you need. And also again, like if we were knowing that like one of the students in the class is planning on doing a co-op, then we can integrate that into the class too and kind of like have a little shout out so that like this applies to you. If you're doing a co-op, you would do that instead.
Yeah, and I would say just so folks we didn't spend a ton of time like disambiguating them, but typically co-living applies to living situations where each like person or family doesn't have like what would be considered like a complete individual unit. So they might be sharing a kitchen or maybe even bathrooms or things like that. And so and co-ops are technically a legal structure, and so you could cooperatize all kinds of things. Like in Montana, we have cooperatized utilities, like electric utilities, and I live across the street from a cooperatized grocery store, right? But so I think when we talk about co-ops, sometimes there's confusion between that, which there are cooperatized co-housing communities, those exist, that I spoke to a little bit, but there's also this idea of like a housing co-op, which is most often either like a house that basically the landlord's role has been cooperatized, or something that's kind of like a fraternity or sorority, often at a university or college, where it's more like a cooperatized student housing. And so I think like some of those, like often like the cooperatized houses are existing houses that are renovated. And so I think, some of like the design patterns, you just have like less flexibility, and often, you're not doing building as part of creating that type of co-op. So I think there'd be like less intersection with our class if that's what you're aiming to do. But if you're trying to do co-living or cooperatized housing that's like new built, a lot of, as Mathilde said, like a lot of the development process would be similar, and a lot of the kind of principles of cooperation would be similar, though there might be more, typically cooperatized housing or co-living has less privacy. The balance of privacy and community is like more, less space per person and more community. So some relevance, but some not as well too, depending on what you're going for.
Oh, you muted, Lotus.
Yeah, I'm wondering if Catherine Shahan wants to unmute and ask the question that you put in there.
Hello.
Hi, Catherine.
So you talk about the question about the class?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what you meant by it, so I thought maybe just have you
Well,
ask yourself.
My sense is that these classes are made up of a variety of people, not necessarily the people forming a group. So I'm just wondering if it sounds like this is a product of classes to engage people in that process. So could you offer that process? Let's say we have 12 people who are interested in co-housing. Is this a bunch of classes they could take, a series of classes they could take together?
Yes.
That's what yeah, okay. So it's not necessarily involving, because it sounded more open to a lot of different people as well when I heard it earlier.
So basically, so if I understand your question, we could make like that class only to one group. Like if, let's say 12 people from the same group were like, we want, to be only together and so on, like, sure, we could do that. But the idea of this class is that, like having different groups and different individuals from around the US and around the world, like to be able to share the experiences. And so, yeah, if that's like specifically, like if you have a group that you want, like, okay, like we would want to take it as an opportunity to do kind of like a free little workshop or something like that, first exercise that we would do only with one another that is targeted towards us. That's a conversation we can have later. But yeah, like yeah,
I think
for everyone.
I think too, like for instance, like the kind of like homework invitation after the first session is about the vision for your community. And so, if you're on your own, then you would kind of like write your personal, like, what do I envision my community to be? If you, I'm assuming you're talking from your personal situation. If you and 12 others who want to form a community are doing that, then, you could get, kind of get together after the class and do that offering together of vision making. And also, like, if you're like, whoa, okay, like we're 12 people, we could use some help with that. Like, I mean, I think Mathilde and I are flexible too, of, kind of, we could set up some, some additional, time with the, 12 of you or something like that.
Yeah. You already, part of one of the things that's offered through the course is an hour consultation. So I think that's kind of moving in that direction. I do think that the way that we had designed this was sort of even more a precursor to the investment that it would be to have that custom workshop for an already formed group. So I was under the impression it would be amazing that all 12 people would join this online training, but I could also see some sort of ambassadors, so to speak, from a group being the ones that are in the training, but then maybe having meetings with the group in between to do those kinds of exercises, and sort of, you could share the recordings with people. If not all 12 people can join this session, we sort of looked at this as that sort of first step that people could take before they are able to invest in a full concentrated consulting and training package. So if does that seem accurate based on?
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Like,
totally.
just-
That's,
Yeah.
Yes.
that's
Yeah,
the
so I
idea.
wasn't
We've had both.
trying to open the floodgates wide to it could be anything. I just meant like, yeah,
Just to get
like
clear
maybe
about
if-
what stage people want to be in when they're joining. I think that was really helpful to understand. And so there may be people that haven't found a group yet, all the way to people who found property and don't have a design yet, is for the most part,
Yes.
what it sounds like, who will be in this group. And so they'll be learning from each other through that. That's fun.
Yes. And so, yeah, that kind of answers hopefully Rebecca's question too. And Rebecca, let us know if it doesn't. But yeah, like basically, like you wouldn't have to be ready already to hire your architect as your like next step right after this class to be able to take this class. Like the idea is really getting you ready to start the process. And so, yeah.
That speaks almost exactly to Rebecca's question. I wonder,
Yes.
Rebecca, did that answer your question, or do you have more that you'd like to know?
nice. Okay, cool. I was just gonna say
Awesome.
to you, Rebecca, I mean, I'm making there's this idea of kind of like founders or burning souls in co-housing. And I would imagine many of the people on this call are kind of like more part of a founding group. And so I think like often people who are taking this class are maybe in that group who are like, great, we want to get going, but like, does it really make sense to do like a big workshop yet? We have 6 people in our group, right? And so that might be a good time. So taking this class will allow like the 6 people in your group. And if it's all 6 or 2 of you and you're going to share it or whatever, right? But then you're like, okay, cool. We've got the information. We can kind of move forward and keep building our group. And then at least, so like when I founded my group, I'd been working in co-housing for, like a decade. So I kind of like knew the process. But we still had a kickoff workshop after we had land. And, it wasn't like a bunch of new information for me at that point, but it was important for my community that like everyone at that stage did like an in-person workshop. So we're all on the same page and could move forward. But most of the founding group were like, yeah, we kind of already knew a lot of the information at that point, right? But it's kind of that workshop at that point is more about like, right, because that participatory process doesn't really work if people have different kind of, first class ticket, economy ticket to participate, right? It needs to be equitable, right? And so that's why a lot of groups will do a kind of workshop to kind of bring everybody up to speed when they start the kind of design process, so that yeah, like you can really engage everyone. But you often kind of like need a lot of that information to get to that stage, which is kind of what we're trying to provide with this class.
Okay.
Sweet. I think that's a lot of the questions. I'm trying to scroll through, trying to find all of the different questions. I know also that there've been like some land acknowledgement questions. That's definitely, like as Eric said, like a big conversation in the movement, in the country even. And we don't have one definite answer. It kind of depends on each community. Each community is talking about it differently. But yeah, I think someone said about like, I am also not aware about a specific community that has done like land reparation yet, but yeah, it is a growing movement and an ongoing conversation. And so yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that, yeah, like some of the people earlier talked about that. So
I wanted to just, we've got it a second, and appreciated Anne your kind of comment about the stove piece. And I think that there is absolutely basically her comment, in case folks didn't see it, was that a kind of problem with that stove that doesn't work super well. Not to pick on that community, it's like a lot of communities have had this challenge where they got kind of foisted like a really commercial piece of kitchen equipment that's kind of hard to use and maybe really noisy. And it kind of comes from the fire code. And I think one of the things with co-housing is this idea of sharing like living space, like almost does not exist elsewhere in American society other than like an intergenerational home, which in terms of the home is still a really normal home. And so consequently, co-housing really doesn't fit very well in the building code, which is divided very sharply between residential buildings and commercial buildings. And all these shared facilities kind of fit in this middle ground between the two. And so that is, I think, something that it really, benefits to have a team with with experience around how to have that negotiation with the fire marshal, so you can explain and kind of why it does make sense, for instance, not to have this massive, expensive, noisy commercial hood. And that still doesn't win 100% of the time. Maybe they had that in New York, maybe they didn't, I don't really know. But yeah, I think that is is a piece. For instance, in Bozeman, like, yeah, we had that same conversation. They were like, we think you should have a commercial hood. And we're like, we don't think so. And here's why. And the fire marshal was like, okay, I'm convinced. You know, don't do any commercial cooking in there for sale and we'll let you do it. I think, yeah, and I think that's like, there's so many stories about that type of thing throughout co-housing development. And, you know, some of the battles you win, some of you don't. But I think part of what we're trying to do with this class is help kind of orient you to, like, you know, kind of components of the design, you know, at least in this specific, or components of co-housing in general, that we think are the most important to set you up for you know, successful development process and ultimately a successful you know, living in your co-housing community.
Yeah, which battles you want to pick. And so kind of going back to that class, and we did have some feedback about the fact, so we had some feedback about the fact that's when we're offering that class, it's Tuesdays at 7 p.m. And so sometimes it's a 1 hour class, sometimes it's a 2 hours class, Easter time, and then 4 p.m. Pacific time. And so, yeah, we wanted to kind of just like quickly have a little poll, or I don't know if Lotus that was, oh yeah, great. So like, this is not really like committing to anything. This is not even like necessarily committing to a day, but it's just kind of an idea about like, when should we, like, we don't know, when should we propose those classes? Is it better during lunchtime? Is it better after work? What would work better for you? And so, yeah, like, this is just kind of a little question. And yeah,
I would like to encourage only people that are thinking of doing the course, though, just so we're hearing more from the people that are wanting to do the course. And you can actually select multiple times as well.
Cool. Sweet. And so while we do that, I also have a slide about the fact that, yeah, we're offering $50 discount until tomorrow. Is it tomorrow or the day after?
The day after. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is kind of an incentive to, and a little thank you for joining us today. Oh, the poll disappeared.
I see it.
Okay, this is pretty spread out, but okay, cool.
Neck and neck with the existing time and the 4 p.m.
Cool. Sweet. Yeah, I think that's my last slide here. We have one last question.
Maybe we could take the screen share off and do a
Yeah,
group photo. If people want to turn your cameras on so we can see you for a group photo. Oh, there's people on this other side of the screen. Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today.
Great. And if you end up coming up with another question that wasn't asked, you're welcome to reach out to Mathilde or I. You can find our contact information on our website, studiocohab.com. And if you end up signing up, we look forward to going through co-housing and learning together and working to help you have a successful community. And if you don't, that's totally cool too. I hope this hour was helpful for you. And if you know anybody else who's interested, please pass it along.
Yes, and the last question I saw in there was, are those recorded? And yeah, all of the classes are going to be recorded. And when you register for it, you're able to have access to it afterwards. And again, like, a big part of being able to join in person to the Zoom class is to be able to ask questions. Well, you're welcome to do that by email too after the class, after watching the recording. So, trying to make it as easy as possible for everyone.
All right. Well, with that, we'll say goodbye. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. Right.